Hello and welcome to the video. Today is quite an exciting day because we have yet another product from Speedybee. They seem to be very busy at the moment, and I was very lucky that they shipped me review units before Chinese New Year bit in earnest. This is the one that I'm probably the most excited about. This is the brand new Speedybee F405 Wing Mini. Yes, you heard that right. This is the Mini. This is the very small version of the flight controller that lots of us have used and loved. Speedybee tend to give us products that offer incredible value for money, and this appears to be no exception. Now, this is basically a little baby version of the fantastic Speedybee F405 Wing. Now, I put mine in the T2 build, if you watch those videos, and it performed very well. The really interesting thing is they've used exactly the same target for Arduino Pilot and iNav. I'll show you that all in a minute. So in terms of setup and settings and things like that, there's not a lot of difference between them, and that's really cute. That's quite a smart way of doing it and producing other versions of these flight controllers. Now, the normal Speedybee F405 Wing isn't particularly big, even though I had to mount it sideways, as you can see here inside that T2. That was more because of a slightly odd configuration of the T2 where the flight controller sits. This is significantly smaller, and if I put it by the side of something like a Maytech F405 Wing, which is kind of the standard for these sizes, you can see how incredibly small it is. So I thought, as I've had it here and I've been playing with it, let me go through some of the specs. I'll put a link down below if you want to go and check out the official website. I'm recording this in advance of it all being released today. So unfortunately, I don't have all of the information in front of me. What I have is what was sent, but also what was in the fantastic manual that actually comes as part of the kit. So while I show you how this comes, let's talk about the specs. So this is very similar to its bigger brother. So it does offer wireless configuration via the Speedybee app, via both Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. It has a separate USB board, as you've already spotted, with the buzzer on it, but on there as well is also the USB-C connection, and there's also the Wi-Fi bits and pieces on there too. It's actually connected to UART6 on the main flight controller, but more about that in a moment. S-Bus input pins are there, as well as all the pins exposed for UART1. So if you want to do something with CRSF, maybe Express LRS or good old Crossfire or Tracer, that's available to you too. The motor outputs on this are nicely presented as servo pins on the rail at the end, along with 7 additional servo outputs. Servos 3 to servos 9 are actually presented with a full set of servo pins, so you can just plug your servos in for all the different control surfaces. And nicely, they're also providing 2 different sets of pins in the kit, so you can either have it right angle and keep the whole thing as low profile as possible, or if you have height in the place that you can install this, then you can install everything vertically, and there are 3 different coloured pins for that: black, red and yellow for signal. On it, there is a GPS port. That is UART3. That is similar to the other one. It comes with a cable, the end of which isn't made off. You can actually make those ends off. They're already crimped into those kind of very small, I think, JST style connectors. Perfect for things like the GPSs that I use here. There is a digital FPV port out. That is going to be perfect for those of us that like to fly things like Walk Snail, DJI, HD0. And it also has the camera connection and the connection out to an analog video transmitter. In fact, this actually supports dual cameras if you want to run that kind of setup. Weighs 19 grams and it's 37 by 26 by 14 millimeters in size. Without those right angle pins, that adds a little bit of length onto the board if you use the right angles to keep the profile nice and low. In terms of building, well, the cool thing is all of the risers and parts that you need come in the kit. Despite the nice price of this is something that I really love about Speedybee. You don't get that thing where you have to try and find a cable or a connector. Everything you need is in here, including a capacitor, also a different board for the bottom, depending on how you want to put it together. And then you have all of the other cables for all of the other connections, including what looks like a cable for an S-Bus connection as well. In terms of the orientation, let's talk a little bit about that because this caught me out. Obviously, you can see here on the flight controller there is an arrow that is pointing to the front, and the front of the board is where the battery and ESC power wires are going to connect. They're not always at the front of the board, but they are on this. The other thing to note is that the power distribution board is actually the top board, and I didn't realize that until I plugged it into iNav. So the way that I'm showing it on screen right now is the way round that it's supposed to be. So there are 6 UARTs on here, similar to its bigger brother. UART 1 is presented as 4 pins by the side of the servo connections. That's going to be used for things like your CRSF connection for your Express LRS or Crossfire. UART 2 and UART 4 are available here on the side in this dedicated port for things like telemetry. That's a really nice option to give the access to those pins for those additional pieces. Might require a bit more wiring because there aren't separate ground and 5 volts, but you can get those from other places. UART 3 is dedicated for your GPS port, which is here at the back. UART 4, as I've said, is on that same connector with UART 2 at the bottom. UART 5 is the one that's dedicated for the HD FPV port, which is down here at the bottom. Again, there is a cable for that. And UART 6 is the one that's actually going up into the bar module. This is the external USB and buzzer, and also the wireless connection as well for all those wireless pieces. You can see all that circuitry on the back. In terms of the options for voltages, well, the default servo voltage output on this, the BEC is going to deliver 5 volts. However, there is a little solder pad that you can bridge that will give it 6 volts if you have servos that will handle that. And I do like the fact that they've also given you an option on what you want to run your video transmitter at. If you're running analog, you can either have battery voltage or you can have 5 volts as well, which is a nice way to do it if you want to limit the heat dissipation in your video transmitter. The layout of the power distribution board is quite nice. The outside is for your battery positive and negative, but then the inside, they've actually got 2 sets of 2 separate pins for your ESC positive and ESC negative, so this will easily support 2 motors. And I like the way it's separate pins rather than trying to get all of the same negative connections onto one big pad, which I'm not a big fan of. No holes though for the included capacitor to be popped on the top of this, so be aware of that. You are going to have to put the cap on. This is probably going to be installed in a plane with a single motor, so I would use the other 2 spare pads and put the cap on there. If you do install the right angle pins, then that will increase the length of the board to 45mm from the advertised 37mm, but it does mean that you can keep a much lower profile board if you don't have a lot of headroom where you want to use it. Now, in terms of the iNav setup, again, this will support RD Pilot and iNav. This was supplied with iNav 6. Not sure what the final production boards will be shipping with. Had a play with it and did all the calibration, and that's where I realized that the board was actually upside down. The power distribution board on this is actually the top, not the bottom, which is more typical for the stuff that I've seen up to now. Calibration went really well and everything worked fine. Then I did go and upgrade it to iNav 7, which was a super simple, easy process. iNav spotted that it was a Speedybee F405 wing. Again, it's using the same target, flashed it up, and I configured it, and it's all working absolutely beautifully. So there's a lot to like about this new flight controller. Speedybee are kind of knocking it out the park at the moment. They're giving some really beautiful frames. They have some great little devices and options, and their flight controller lineup is getting really good. If I was Matek, I'd be getting a little bit worried about now. I will probably order another couple of these for different builds. For iNav in particular, where you just want to put a little flight controller in there and everything from basic stabilization right the way up to autonomous flying with GPS waypoints, you can absolutely do it with this. And this smaller form factor means that I can now put it in places where some of the other boards would have been a little bit tight. Things like the ZOHD drift, for example, this would go in great and give me full functionality. I don't have to try and modify an existing non-wing flight controller to work on a fixed wing. This will kind of do the job, and you get everything in the pack that you need, so you don't have to scrabble around to try and find the pins that are going to work for you. Only a couple of things to be aware of with this. Most of the time when I'm using something like this in a fixed wing, it's mounted inside the fixed wing with double-sided foam tape. That's probably the way that I will use this one, because the mounting holes aren't typical. They're not kind of 20 by 20 or 30.5 by 30.5. They're slightly unique, but I don't think that's particularly an issue on a wing flight controller, where we are going to use something like double-sided foam tape to stick it in. Be aware of the way it's laid out. The power distribution board is at the top. That is a little bit unusual, but I quite like the layout of this. I don't think that's particularly going to be a problem, but you are going to have to just keep that in mind when you're figuring out where your wires are going to be. So rather than the PDB typically being at the back of the board towards where the ESC is going to be, the ESC wires are going to have to come round. You could always mount the board in other orientations and fix that in the software, but the default one, the power distribution board, is going to be at the top. And the only other thing to mention is that the wireless flashing of firmware isn't supported on this. You are going to have to plug it into a PC, but once the firmware is flashed, the rest of the setup can either be done via the computer you've got or via the Speedybee app on the phone, via Bluetooth or via Wi-Fi. So Speedybee does it again. The proof of the pudding with flight controllers like this is when you actually use them in anger. So I'm looking for a model of mine that I can put this in and have a lot of fun with. I'll probably stick this in with a walk snail unit and have another iNav walk snail plane or wing to fly around in. I can see this being a really great option for those times when space is a real premium and when you don't want to spend a fortune on a flight controller. Maybe you just want to try iNav out for the first time, or you're someone like me that uses it all the time that just wants something that's small and compact, that's not much bigger than what I was looking at in terms of a regular stabilizer, and probably at less cost as well. So again, links below if you have been looking for a small, cheap and cheerful flight controller that comes with everything you need in the box. And the F405 wing, the other version of it from Speedybee, was a little bit too big. Well, I'd go and remeasure that space that you have in the model, because now you know the dimensions of this. You might find that this one will fit with room to spare. Thank you for watching the video. If you watch my videos and find them useful, then please take a moment to hit the like and subscribe button. It helps the channel a lot. If you really like what I'm doing here, you can become a Patreon and support the time I spend helping others and get access to lots of exclusive benefits. Link is in the video description. Remember that all the videos on the channel are organized into playlists, so you can easily use those playlists to find all the videos on a subject that you are interested in. Add Painless 360 to your searches on Google and YouTube, and it'll help you find my content for any particular topic. Thanks again for watching, and as always, happy flying.